What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the 8 deaths of Spider-Man. And yeah, Spider-Man just basically gets broken in this whole thing, and it's really interesting. So, as we've talked about, and again, there's a playlist to get caught up if you need it. In essence, Spider-Man is fighting the children of the demon Cyttorak, the guy who gives Juggernaut his powers, and that if he loses, Cyttorak will be allowed to invade Earth. So as you can imagine, Spider-Man has to win all of these, but every fight that he engages in will result in him dying. And so that right there is enough to break him. But the fight that he has in this particular story, it's on a whole nother level, and it's really cool. So initially, the way this fight breaks out is it kind of goes between Calyx and CYRA, or CYRA, however you want to pronounce it, and they kind of fight as a duo. Now, what's going to be really interesting about this is the fight with CYRA is the really cool one. Calyx sucks, right? This guy gets beat like that, and literally Spider-Man makes a joke out of it because they both represent kind of the inevitability of something, and it's sort of a duality in terms of how it works, right? The inevitability of pain and the inevitability of death. The two kind of go hand in hand. But the fact is, with Calyx, it's more than simply just physical pain. It's also emotional pain, different things along those lines. And so because of the fact that he and his sister have been watching Spider-Man, and also because Calyx is kind of an idiot, he ends up sending his dogs, so to speak, pets, essentially, after individuals, innocent people, and the people that Spider-Man loves and cares about. Now, while that happens, Calyx tries to kind of attack him on and off as things go down, and for the most part, none of it really works, right? Spider-Man webs up the animals pretty quickly, and then Calyx jumps in for the actual fight, and Spider-Man absolutely pummels this guy. The whole thing happens over the course of like 2 pages, right? Like he beats the tar out of this guy. And it's kind of funny because when it's all said and done, Spider-Man's like, I mean, look, would you just yield? Like, this is embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for you. And I'm a guy who knows what it's like to take a beat down. And where Calyx is like, I refuse to submit, right, to somebody like you who's a worm, Spider-Man's like, okay, so first I was an insect, and now I'm a worm. I don't really know. It seems like a step backward, right? But that's when CYRA shows up. And this is when it gets really cool. Because at that point, Calyx is like, okay, have your fun, right? Like, have your turn, sister. And that's when she tells him, I represent the inevitability of death. Now, this is a very awesome part in the story, right? It's one of the best things that goes on here because it's not some grandiose fight. It's not some huge conflict. Spider-Man thinks it is, right? Spider-Man thinks it's going to be the two of them going back and forth, and she represents the inevitability of death because she's just so powerful, there's no way Spider-Man can win, and so of course he's going to die. She says, it is a challenge, and if you fail the challenge, you lose the contest, right? So you're going to have to get with this. But she says, this is a sphere, and your job is to hold this sphere, and you just hold it. And that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, Spider-Man's just kind of like, okay, like he starts casting all these protection spells and things like that. And she says, it's not that kind of challenge. Your wards are meaningless. And she says, hold this sphere until you can no longer bear it. If you set it down, the challenge is over and I win. Now, Spider-Man's just kind of like, okay, so like, does it burn the heat of like 1,000 suns or something? And she's like, no. Pain is Calyx's unimaginable obsession. The sphere shows only truth. I have found that truth is unbearable for your kind. And Peter's like, how do I win? And she's like, you won't. But he's like, but I mean, if I could, how would I win? And she's like, you just hold the sphere until it has nothing left to show you. And so Peter picks it up. And immediately he's whisked away mentally to Aunt May as she's sitting on her deathbed. And this is so incredible, right? It says, Maybelle Parker Jameson is an accomplished philanthropist whose ability to inspire compassionate action amid the suffering of others earns her the post of chairwoman of the International Feast Organization at the age of 79. In the winter of the same year, a virulent plague sweeps across the earth, catching officials and health experts unaware. The initial surge of the Essex virus kills over 3 million people in less than a month. As a cancer survivor, May is especially vulnerable and her ability to breathe on her own becomes gravely compromised. Her caregivers try multiple interventions, but her lungs will not absorb oxygen. The sound of the breathing machine is deafening. Doctors must yell their explanation that the only remaining course of action is intubation and induced coma. May chooses instead to offer up her bed to someone with a greater likelihood of survival. She is resolute in her generous decision. Her caregivers honor her wishes and move her into triage, where she will be made comfortable with a morphine drip until she dies among strangers. As she drifts off to endless sleep, chest heavy with labored breath, May Parker dies wishing she could have kissed her Peter, her son, one last time. And that's where CYRA kind of shows up here, and Spider-Man's just like, inevitability of death, right? So that's your thing. I've suffered more loss than you can possibly know, lady. I can watch sad movies about my life all the time. And she's like, you will. Just wait, right? You will. So then you switch over to Mary Jane Watson, who more recently in Marvel Comics has become a superhero named Jackpot. Her comics are okay. But it says Mary Jane Watson is no stranger to pain. As a child, she survived a broken home and abusive father. As a young woman, she suffered the brutish plots of other abusive men, but refused to let those battles dull her spirit. She fell in love with a family friend, but lost him to cosmic folly. Of course, talking about One More Day and the whole Mephisto storyline. When her most recent companion inherited the power to bend reality, she chose to use it to help others before losing their children. As she battles one of the greatest villains her city has ever known, part of her reflects on all this and wonders, could I have done things differently, lived differently, loved differently? Because for everything I think I did right, it feels like I never quite hit the jackpot that I was promised. And as the life drains from her body, only one answer comes to her. Mary Jane dies in the arms of her former lover and friend, dissatisfied. Now, this is really fascinating here, right? Because in a few different ways, it kind of points to the idea that MJ always felt like she was destined to be with Peter Parker. And the fan base would largely argue that, right? More out of nostalgia than anything else. But the fan base would argue that MJ and Peter are supposed to be together, right? Just like fans of Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy would have argued that Peter and Gwen should have been together, not Peter and MJ. So it kind of depends on which kind of romantic connection that you like the most. But it's one of these cool things because Peter, in observing all of this, is like, I get this game. Who can get bored first? This is cool. I'm winning, right? The future isn't written. This is just some emo fanfic from some demon chick who sits around all day smoking cigarettes, listening to The Cure. And she says, true, it's possible she dies in her sleep at 94 or chokes on some fruit tomorrow. What is indisputable, however, is that her life will end. And Peter's like, I mean, yeah, I know that, right? Everybody who lives will ultimately die. But the kicker is CYRA says, yes, you do know it. But now you feel it. And it just goes one after the other, right? J. Jonah Jameson dies of a brain aneurysm. He's replaced as the head of the Daily Bugle within a week. Shay Markin, right? One of the closest people to Peter Parker and his love interest at one point in time, she dies in a car crash. Robbie Robertson's son, Randy, he's trampled to death in a protest that ultimately turns violent. In the case of Felicia Hardy, she's swinging around and the rope snaps and she just falls to her death. It says after that happens, her considerable estate is confiscated by the government and earmarked for redistribution into the prison industrial complex. But again, constantly kind of back and forth and back and forth. Peter kind of seems to play this off. And it's like, I mean, sure, like all these people are going to die, you know, it's just kind of the way things are, right? Betty Brant grows old and she dies. That Norman Osborn grows old and he dies or just kind of dies in the midst of an experiment. It happens over and over and over again. Miles Morales, Bailey Briggs, Gwen Stacy, these spider people, what's really interesting about them is it says their deaths will be meaningless in the resolution of the cataclysm. They do not die as martyrs. They do not die as heroes. They just die. Humans full of potential and promise and love and fear and confusion, one moment, empty shells of meat and viscera the next. And that's where it really starts to hit Peter because he's like, no, they're kids. But at the end of the day, CYRA's like human children die too, even brave children. And again, that's where Death shows up, of course, being played by Phil Coulson because Thanos is running around with Mistress Death confined to an Infinity Stone. I know, it's weird. It's really cool, but it's weird. But the response here, right, is that when Phil Coulson shows up to take Miles Morales, Spider-Man intervenes, right? And that's where Coulson's like, Spider-Man, oh, wait a minute, no, that's right. You're still in the Covenant, aren't you? Right? Because remember, when you're death, you're a cosmic entity. All time exists simultaneously, right? So he's just kind of like, wow. So yeah, okay, you're still in the Covenant. You're going through the whole CYRA trial, aren't you? Like where she's showing you everybody who dies. And it's really fascinating here because as the two of them are talking, right, and Peter's trying to stop Phil Coulson, that this illusion no longer is an illusion for Peter. It's a reality. He's just like, no, you can't do this. And the whole time that it's going on, that you have CYRA who's kind of narrating this whole thing. She says, you see, it's not the pain of dying. You've felt that pain before. You've died yourself. It's not the fear, though that can sometimes be terrible, but you understand fear. So that's not going to impact you either. It's not the loss itself, as great as it may be, and as sorrowful as it is, uncelebrated and unnoticed, or even a heralded death. What you understand now with crystal clarity each time you see a fellow human die is the utter lack of impact they had on the world. With a long enough view to the horizon of the cosmos, no single life matters. A foundational element of your worldview is crumbling more with every death to which you bear witness. Everyone dies, everyone is forgotten, every legacy ends, every great work is lost. You came from nothing, you return to nothing. Life is nothing. This is why you fight, in defense of ephemeral whispers who were dead the instant they were born, trapped in meaningless lives with inevitable ends whose echoes fade and leave only silence. It is dark, but it's also fascinating at the same time because none of it's true, right? I mean, sure, every human being born into the world will inevitably die. That's the nature of the world in which we live. But there's the 6 degrees of separation, right? You have, in some capacity, regardless of how large or small it has been, touched the life of another person. I mean, if I'm getting a little emotional here, as my fans, you guys have touched my life. I've touched you. And you have definitely touched me. No, it's true though, right? Like everybody touches the lives of everybody else in some capacity. And so sure, in the physical form in which we know them, hanging out with them, talking to them, laughing with them, that's not there anymore. The reality is that they, in some capacity, continue on with us. And with them, we in turn influence the lives of other people. So no one's ever truly gone, as cliche as it may sound. But the truth is that in this kind of situation, and what Peter Parker is experiencing here is, in a lot of ways, the pain of seeing so many people die. That people die every day in the world. People die in car crashes, people die in violent crimes that seem to make no sense whatsoever. You never knew their name, you never know their story, and you have no reason to think about them whatsoever. But what if you did? What if like that, every single person who is currently dying right now in this moment, you not only were aware of the fact that they were dying, but you felt the pain of loss with their death? That would be like experiencing the worst death that you've ever experienced in your entire life, right? Losing the person closest to you in your whole life, multiplied by 1,000-fold, right? 1,000 times over at one time. It's an overwhelming sensation, and it breaks Peter, right? Because in some ways, it just calls into question everything. But despite all of that, and this is a testament to Peter as a character, despite all of that, he never lets go. He holds on to the sphere the entire time through all the pain and all the anguish, which surely you and I would have dropped that thing in an instant. Peter never does. He never lets it fall. And it drives CYRA nuts because she's like, no, like you're experiencing all this death and all this pain and all this anguish, but you still hold on. I absolutely hate you for this. Now, of course, the story kind of bounces back into cliches where you have Calix who shows up and he tries to attack Peter and so on and so forth. But CYRA's kind of touched by this. Peter's whole action here and holding onto the sphere, grieving the lives of people who were dying, people that he never knew. Right? But through it all, Peter held on. But the fact is that because he's broken in such a way, he's there, but he's not really there. And so ultimately he's beat to death by Calix and then wakes up in front of Phil Coulson. But that's when you get this kind of conversation between himself and the disembodied spirit of Doctor Strange, right? The one that's kind of guiding him through this entire trial. And Doctor Strange asks, how many did you get through before you died? And Doctor Strange says, 171,963 is my record. That's the number of deaths that I had to witness before I couldn't take it anymore. And he says, I couldn't warn you, and I'm sorry about that. CYRA's trial, it never changes. It's always the same. The others like to experiment, but you held on, right? You did it. You held on, Peter. And he says, 3 scions remain. And if you can believe it, they are worse than what you faced so far. And so in his conversation with Phil Coulson, Coulson says, you're more than halfway through Spider-Man, hang in there, right? Like you're gonna be able to handle this. And so again, kind of switching back to Doctor Strange, he says, you've acquitted yourself well, but you need to redouble your efforts, Peter. The trials ahead require skill and imagination. And at that point, the breaking point of Peter has been reached. And he's like, why? And Doctor Strange is like, I don't really understand the question. And Peter's like, why do any of it? Right? Why does any of this matter, right? It doesn't matter at all. And Doctor Strange says, Peter, what you saw, what you felt, I mean, I know it's a lot. And Peter's like, I mean, a lot. Okay, sure, whatever, man. Like, but Doctor Strange is like, but you know that people die. You're not naive. It's what we are. And Peter's like, exactly, right? Like what we are is meaningless. And so he's like, I'm sorry, man. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. I quit. I don't care. And Peter walks away. And so what you do is you pick up in the aftermath of this. Now, initially you kind of have the brother and sister who appear before, CYRA, whatever. But CYRA, fascinated by all of this, appears to Doctor Strange. And it's just kind of like, tell me about this guy, right? Like, this is so strange to me, right? It's so strange that this guy mourned, he grieved for the loss of people that he never met. And this challenge has really like fractured him on a personal level, broken him on a personal level, to the point where Peter walks into a store and while it's being robbed at gunpoint, he does nothing, right? In fact, the only thing he really does is he addresses the criminal and he's like, how long did it take you to convince yourself that this was a good idea? And the guy's like, I mean, are you talking to me? And he's like, yeah, like I'm talking to you. You're going to get caught and you're going to go to jail for what? Like $64 in the register? No one even uses cash anymore. You're going to give up 5 years of your life and you can't even buy a video game. All this, and for what? A system that gives us a few billionaires and leaves everyone else squabbling for pennies. And then you die and your family has to have a bake sale to bury you. It's a broken world and a broken system, and the only way to win is to simply not play at all. Anyway, you should just leave it alone. Stop robbing people. And if you really need money, go apply at a grocery store or something. And the guy's kind of like, dude, are you off your rocker? But then like Bailey Briggs shows up, right? Spider-Boy, 10-year-old Spider-Man shows up here and basically takes the guy out. But then he addresses Peter directly and he's like, dude, what's your deal, man? Right? And Peter's just like, I'm fine, Spider-Boy, right? I'm just done lying to myself. It doesn't matter how hard you work. You can't change anything. And he's like, you're what, like 8 years old? Right? Like, stop wasting your time with all this superhero nonsense. Go play tag or something, right? Like, be a kid. And he's like, I'm 10 years old, man. And he's like, and just because you're sad doesn't mean that you can give up, right? Like, you have to keep trying because things can get better. And they do get better. And the response of Peter, sadly, they very much do not, right? But again, Doctor Strange and CYRA are watching this whole thing, watching all of this unfold. And so what ends up happening, right, in the aftermath of this is that Peter hits up his girl, right, who he'd effectively ghosted, right, like just kind of disappeared. Part of it was because he was in the trial, so he kind of had to just disappear and just kind of be very scant and very Superman Lois Lane-like in the early days, right, where he's just, oh my God, look at the time, I gotta go do anything other than be here, right, and then just like take off and go do his thing. But she's just like, what's your problem, right? I mean, you ghosted me, you sent me a text out of nowhere that says you need help. Like, be lucky I even showed up here, and it's only because I'm a decent human being that I did. And so Peter's like, you're right, but I have a question. Like, it's something that's been bothering me, and I have to ask you this question. And she's like, how do you do it? Right? Like, you're a nurse. You've lost so many people in your line of work. How do you do it when it all feels so pointless? And she responds with the best response imaginable. She says, here's the thing, right? I'd gotten close to a patient once, this girl named Elisa. She was super strong. She chose a life of crime, got caught. Also, she chose the life of a smoker. Finally, she stopped, but it was ultimately too late. We tried to fight it and we lost. It happens every day. and it always hurts. But that time, I wanted to quit. I wanted to give up and I wanted to walk away. A day or two later, it hit me, right? It does happen every day. The death, the pain, it doesn't matter if I'm a nurse or a checkout lady at CVS, but I like being a nurse. I like helping people. There's a saying that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Find a professional to talk to and good luck. I hope that helps. And the reality and kind of what she's hitting at here, right, which is so important in all of this, is that yes, death is inevitable. It is inevitable that we are going to lose people. There's no getting around that, right? As Al Pacino said in Any Given Sunday, as you get older, things just get taken from you. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. No number of laws, no number of executive orders, no numbers of prayers and wishing and hoping can prevent random chance. And so because of that, all you can do is just live with the pain and do the best you can to process it, carry on the things you loved, and try to leave the things that you disliked behind. Now, if only it were so easy. Like, believe me, I'm still dealing with the grieving process myself. So if only it were so easy to simply just do that, right? To just kind of flick off and flick things on like a switch. And it's not, right? It's why living can be so hard. But the reality here and the suffering is optional aspect comes in the form of saying, yes, people are going to die all the time. And as a superhero, you can't save everybody, but you can take comfort in the fact that you saved who you could. Sure, that bus is about to go careening off the cliff, and maybe it does. You can only save one person in the bus and the other however many die. A cynical person would tell you, well, you're no measure of a superhero at all because you lost the majority of the people who were there. But somebody who's a little more practical would say, yeah, but you could have lost everybody. You did what you could. And that's all any of us, you, I, or anybody, ever really can do. And so at this point, what you do is you switch over to the X-Men's headquarters in Alaska, which is kind of the main base of operations for what passes for the X-Men team in the aftermath of the fall of Krakoa. I don't say that cynically. The X-Men as a kind of team and the mutant kind of society of sorts has largely just been fractured. That's all taking place in Jed McKay's run in the X-Men comics, and you get Extraordinary X-Men and a few other things. I think Exceptional X-Men or whatever. But Juggernaut's kind of feeling the effect of what's going on, because keep in mind, Juggernaut is not really a child of Cyttorak, but he does get his power from Cyttorak. And seemingly he's aware of this, right? We don't know if something's different here or if Juggernaut experienced the same thing every time Doctor Strange was undergoing the trials against the children of Cyttorak. And so ultimately he kind of gathers together the X-Men and he's like, we need to go to New York, because if we don't get there right now, like the world's going to end, right? So this is fascinating because at that point you pick up with Peter and you switch back over to his conversation with Felicia Hardy. And so as the two of them are kind of talking, she's like, so why are you lingering outside my apartment and out of costume? And Peter's like, because I'm trying to clap them cheeks. That's not true. But he's like, I saw you die, Felicia, right? Like I saw everyone die, every single person, and it did nothing. The world went on. And I just can't, right? I can't process this idea that all these superheroes, everybody that I know and love dies, and the world just keeps on spinning. It doesn't stop, right? That is also one of the more difficult things. You lose somebody close to you and most of the world would never know that it happened, right? They wouldn't even know that person existed. It's a very painful thing to have because you almost want to scream to the world, why don't you care? Right? But it's a very painful thing to kind of contend with here. But she says, everyone dies, Spider, right? That's just how the story ends. You won the challenge though, right? And he's like, I mean, I didn't lose, but I lost. And he says, and I don't think there can be a win, like ever, you know, like Peter's wrestling with depression in the aftermath of what he experienced, right? And he's like, I just really can't keep doing it, like any of it, like the superhero stuff or the trials or anything, because none of it seems to matter. And so at that point, Felicia's like, and so you came here, why? Right? So is that why you're here, Peter? So you can just kind of emotionally dump, right? And complain about how unfair life is? Like, life isn't fair, Peter. That's just the way the world works. You can't make life fair. That there are people who have and there are people who don't. There are people who win and there are people who lose. And that's the way that it is. You can try to make it fair in every way that you can, but the reality is that in this world, nothing will ever be laid out flat and even for everybody, everywhere, all the time. Someone is going to lose somewhere. So if you can't handle that, then get it together, right? Because Peter's just kind of sitting here and he's like, when we first met, you'd ask me why I did what I did. And I always had an answer, right? Sometimes I felt a little stupid and naive, even back then. I feel really stupid and naive now. and I don't really feel much of anything at the moment, if I'm being quite honest. She's like, Peter, you have to know that no matter how bad things get, there is still good in this world. That's the way the world is, right? I mean, there's good things here. It's not fair, it's not always right, but there is good. And our job as superheroes is to promote that good. And it's kind of the other half of the equation that Peter is forgetting about. Sure, as Spider-Man, he saves people from being robbed, or he makes life for criminals just hard, right? Or different things like that, which nobody would complain about. But the other thing that it does is it inspires people. It motivates people, right? People getting out there into the world and seeing that at least somebody's watching out for them makes them a little more inspired to help other people, right? That kind of thing. The world doesn't seem as dark and bleak, right, as it could be if there were no superheroes in the world whatsoever. And so kind of switching back to this conversation between CYRA and Doctor Strange, she says, I thought I understood you humans, but I judged all of them by you. And he is not like you. This new champion has shown me how little I understand. He seeks to find comfort in one whose loss will destroy him. It's a contradiction bereft of logic. And he says, that's humanity in a nutshell. And Peter is humanity. Like, we are oftentimes contradictory, right? But he asks, like, what did you do to him? And she says, nothing, right? Nothing that I didn't do to you, just more of it, right? Like, I just showed him more death than I showed you. And it's kind of nuts, right? Because Doctor Strange is like, how much more death did you show him? And she's like, well, I mean, the last time that you and I met, you endured 809,000 deaths. And he's like, and Peter, like, how many did he experience? And she's like, 3 million. And he didn't drop the sphere even once. And after breaking, he can't help but seek connection to other people. It's strange, and it doesn't make any sense to me. So again, it's fascinating, right? It's if anything, a testament to the nature of Peter to experience the raw, true emotion of the deaths of 3 million people in such rapid succession would break any human being. And it's no wonder Peter's struggling with depression and all these things that come out of it. But then at that point, Cradio shows up, the next scion of Cyttorak, because the battle goes on, the conflict continues. But when he shows up there in front of an old lady and her dog, he was like, it is I, Cradios, prepared to meet your end, you miserable human. And it's just like this old woman, and he's like, where is he? Where's the champion that's supposed to be here? But Peter's bailed out, and surely this old lady and her dog aren't going to fight this guy. But the Juggernaut shows up alongside the other X-Men, keeping in mind, we got Quentin Quire here, an Omega level telepath, and you got Magic, right? Not to say anything of Cyclops and Psylocke, right? You got super powerful characters here. And it's just like, prepare, right? Like, we X-Men accept your challenge. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. We will find out when issue number 67 comes out how this whole thing unfolds, because it's dope. I love it. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.